Hello everyone, and welcome to Biopedia. Back during episode 59, I gave an obituary of sorts for James Lovelock, the creator of the Gaia Hypothesis. During that episode, I said that we wouldn't be touching on the hypothesis itself because of its complexity, and I left it as a topic for another day. Well, it turns out another day dawns today. As an aside, I've set this as a topic for episode 103 because Lovelock himself lived to be 103 years old. It just seemed poetic somehow. The core principle of this hypothesis is that the biosphere of the Earth regulates itself. This biosphere consists of that part of the Earth on or near the surface where life can be found. This regulation or homeostasis of sorts keeps the planet within the conditions needed for life to continue existing. Let's back up a bit. Back in the 1970s, Lovelock was thinking about the fact that our atmosphere contains both oxygen and methane. These two compounds are both the result of biogenic creation. Now, the atmosphere of Earth is both created and regulated by living things. For example, if there are lots more plants to take in carbon dioxide, more animals will emerge to eat them, which means that more carbon is released back into the sky again as carbon dioxide. Lovelock was thinking about the fact that our atmosphere contains both oxygen and methane, which, just abiotically speaking, shouldn't really happen. Lovelock actually has a 1965 paper about the usefulness of high oxygen content specifically, and order or a lack of abiotic equilibrium generally, in detecting planetary life, which I will reference in the description. Anyway, Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, famous for the endosymbiotic theory, worked together to explore more of these feedback loops. These loops involve living things interacting with ocean water, minerals, rock, and the atmosphere, and all of them kept earthly conditions stable. This led to a description of the Earth as a superorganism of sorts. This means that, when the planet's life is considered as a whole, the behavior of a larger organism seems to emerge in some ways. This superorganism was duly named Gaia, after the Greek goddess of the same name. Lovelock himself explains the story of what Gaia is in his 2006 book, The Revenge of Gaia. To be clear, Gaia is meant to represent homeostatic feedbacks and not a conscious entity. Lovelock himself would simplify this model in something called Daisy World. What is this? Well, in 1981, Lovelock used a computer model to simulate a world with only dark plants or light plants on a world which was seeing steadily more sunlight as time went on. This model was named Daisy World. The simulated system was stable and resilient to shocks. Initially, the system had a young, comparatively cool sun, and the dark-coloured daisies were the ones that dominated. The only exception was at the equator, where the brighter shaded daisies could be located. As the sun the planet orbited got brighter and hotter over time, the brighter daisies began pushing back the darker daisies. Due to this competition and relative switching of position and dominance, in the Daisy World simulation, the planet stayed at a suitable temperature for life. Now, eventually, the planet turned lifeless as the heat got too much, but the general point stands that this simulation found that mechanics such as this kept the planet habitable. Lovelock later expanded this model to include more species and include rabbits and foxes to make the simulated ecosystem more complex, but again, he found this same stability. Let's get into the mechanics here a little bit, as Lovelock does later in chapter 2 in his book. If you simulate conditions using only organisms and their interactions, you see graphs of abundance which are unstable and zigzag all over the place, as Lovelock describes it. What is missing is stability, and Lovelock cites the constraining influence of the abiotic world as being crucial here. Now, what do I mean exactly when I say that the abundances zigzag all over the place? Well, for example, there is a model developed by Vito Volterra and Alfred Lotka back in the 1920s, which modeled the interactions between predators and prey. They came up with a graph which essentially shows the abundances of both predators and prey cycling up and down with slight delays. In this example, we start with the prey population's abundance going up. This results in more predators being able to be supported, so that population then goes up, lagging slightly behind the prey population. This increased abundance in predators results in a decline in the prey population shortly after, which would make sense given that there would now be more predators to predate on them. However, if this keeps going, with less prey around, the predator population can't be sustained at its previous high level, so it goes down as well. This then repeats the cycle as the amount of prey animals can then increase again, putting us back where we started. So what we end up with is two graphs that look a bit like sine waves, delayed slightly from each other as the predator and prey populations respond to each other. The point I'm making here is that you see a lot of flux in this model, and I assume this is the kind of thing Lovelock is saying would be made more stable if abiotic factors were introduced into the model. Now, what are these abiotic factors? Well, any living being has to exist within certain ranges of conditions, which is what these constraints are. Moving on to something a bit more abstract, in trying to explain what Gaia is at all, Lovelock does mention an example which I poured a lot of thought into and which I therefore wanted to share here. He poses the question of why animals urinate. And yes, I promise this is connected, stick with me. After all, animals could just excrete gaseous nitrogen, water, and carbon dioxide, for instance. You wouldn't need to get rid of all the water that urine requires either, so why convert waste into products such as urea? Lovelock proposes that, in the process of Gaia's evolution, animals underwent selection to get rid of nitrogen in urea or uric acid form, as opposed to this gaseous nitrogen. This happened in order to prevent the world's flora being deprived of the nitrogen they need. The idea is that animals which excreted resources plants could use would stand a better chance of surviving because there would be more food. From there, it's just a case of following the Darwinian model of natural selection, and the rest is history. Or, well, in this case, biology. In fact, it's noted that the presence of bacteria which can break down nitrogen-based compounds into nitrogen gas, and our symbiosis with them might be better for us than trying to complete this process ourselves. Lovelock uses the existence and abundance of these exact same bacteria to refute a hypothetical skeptic's argument, saying that the reason we excrete urea is because of the toxicity of molecules formed by oxidizing ammonia or urea. In other words, the process of breaking down such molecules can't be inherently toxic because bacteria do carry them out, and in the process of excreting the compounds they use, we are outsourcing a process we need in the form of these compounds being broken down. I guess this connects back to the idea of the Black Queen hypothesis we discussed all the way back in episode 21. Now, I'm going to skip back over this concept here with the help of a 2012 paper by Morris et al. They proposed this Black Queen hypothesis, which was the idea that loss of genes by certain organisms through genetic drift leave the organisms in question depending on others to fill this missing gene function for them. You essentially have some, in this case microbes, creating so-called public goods, or products of gene function that can be accessed by the wider community because some gene functions are deemed to leak. In such a case, a microbe without the gene in question would, in essence, be outsourcing that gene function to another microbe and reaping the benefits. Moving over to Gaia, the example of animals excreting compounds such as urea is called altruistic by Lovelock, given that it gives nourishment to the flora. I suppose if you're saying that plants need these compounds and couldn't just have evolved the function those bacteria used themselves, it would be altruistic from Gaia's perspective. After all, animals are providing needed nutrients to the plants. However, we can also interpret it as a selfish action with the help of the Black Queen hypothesis as a guide to how this would work. In essence, the animals would be outsourcing the breakdown of compounds so they don't have to do it themselves. Urea is said to come along naturally in the book due to the reshuffling of elements to extract value from foods we ingest. In this case, we are simply disposing of a natural byproduct by making it someone else's problem. This excretion of the compound, rather than changing it further ourselves, would, I guess, save energy and therefore be beneficial, apart from the benefits Lovelock describes in his book, giving a selective advantage. Similarly, the symbiosis between plants and the bacteria which carry out this function could, I suppose, be interpreted in a similar way. There is a thought that I'd like to finish on today, and that is a thought I came away with after I read part of Lovelock's earlier book on Gaia a few years ago. I'll reference the book in the show notes, but I won't go through what I read previously here, as it's a thought I came up with myself building on the general idea of Gaia. And besides, I wouldn't be able to remember now which extract it actually came from. It's common knowledge that the ozone layer protects us from ultraviolet radiation, which lowers the incidence of mutations and cancer. However, as anyone who's ever had a sunburn can attest, some ultraviolet radiation does still reach the surface. This got me thinking, if Gaia is supposed to maintain habitable conditions, is it just the case that the ozone layer is being sloppy letting this UV through, or could there be a reason why some ultraviolet still gets through? This in turn got me thinking about what ultraviolet radiation does. It's ionizing and can lead to mutations. Yes, this could lead to problems such as cancer, but mutation is also the bread and butter of evolution. Perhaps the smaller proportion of ultraviolet light that gets through gives a boost to the rate of evolution in some way. This is pure speculation on my part, so if anyone has anything to contribute to this point, please drop me a line at the show's email address. I'd love to hear from you. However, the general point I'm making is that this thought process of Gaia, if not just taken as literally meaning a superorganism, but instead a series of homeostatic feedbacks, can lead to new perspectives and new lines of thought. That brings us to the end of today's episode. As always, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.